Well, should we talk about some more innovations, Matt? We're going to be talking about South Korea for a little bit. And, for people who've been watching the show, it's a weekly show. So sometimes, covering all these breaking events, it'll get old pretty quickly. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happened today and give folks some context and some really, really disturbing video from a couple years back that you definitely are going to need to stick around for. But as most people who are watching this program probably know, earlier today, there was an attempt by President Yoon of South Korea to basically stifle dissent, and he put out he put out a call for martial law in South Korea. And we can talk a little bit about the context in a second, but I just want to give people a timeline here. Puts out this call for martial law. People immediately react negatively to it, and in the Korean system. The legislature can get together and overrule a martial law ordinance from the president. So that happened. So President Yoon puts out this call for martial law. People um, get together and vote to overrule this martial law order from the president. There was a standoff for a little while. There was questions about whether or not he was going to respect it. And as of just a couple hours ago, it is being reported by Reuters that President Yoon has reversed his martial law order after lawmakers defy him. It is an interesting way to frame it. Um, Reverse, I mean, he was basically forced to by popular majorities, and we can talk about that in just a minute.
The Brits would call it a U-turn, I think.
Yeah. But just to give people some context here, because I want to play this video, and you really need to understand who this character is to understand why it is so frightening. So he wins this election in 2022 by an extremely narrow margin, right? By 0.8% of the vote. As president, he has, increased his. He's the Biden administration has liked him a lot because he's been ramping up hostilities with North Korea, amongst other things. As president, he has waged an extreme crackdown on union activity. I mean, things have gotten so bad that a union leader, I believe last year, set themselves on fire in protest of the crackdowns against union activity in Korea. There's been plenty of attempts to limit the ability of his political opponents and journalists to engage in free speech activities, to associate freely. So this has been somebody who's been at war with the unions, been at war with his political opponents, and has been at war with the very concept of democracy itself. Um, he's been doing this because he doesn't have a popular mandate. He squeaked by in the election 2022. Earlier this year, his party did not do well in the most recent elections, which has only weakened his power. The Korean state is effectively in a deadlock, and he has basically taken to trying to use the repressive apparatus of the state, the courts and the military, to attack political opponents and union leaders.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we're going to get to how he's been greeted by America's domestic political establishment.
Yeah. So, anyways, the point here is that they knew who he was when he came on a state visit to the United States. We'll play this video that I'm sure plenty of people have seen today, that a lot of people were playing back when he visited, of him singing American Pie in just a moment. But I want people to understand the context of who this guy is and what his activities were. Again, like attacking unions, attacking freedom of speech, attacking journalists in his country. Um, before we play this video here, because I think it's really critical. So let me just read this quote to folks about what he says about his political opponents before we get into this clip. Excuse me. It's gonna take 1 second for me to.
Yeah, and while you're getting that up, the scenes today were like sending the military in, trying to break military doing a Jan 6 on Parliament as Parliament got the
Mhm.
parliamentary body got together saying, "Hey, actually, we override this martial law." Oh yeah, here we go.
All right, so this is just a quick quote here from a Jacobin piece that people should read. South Korea's 3-hour coup by Jamie Dosset and Jin So Lee. Um, But this is a quote from him. For instance, this is about President Yoon. For instance, in his August 2023 Liberation Day speech, Yoon declared that the forces of communist totalitarianism have always disguised themselves as democracy activists while engaging in despicable, unethical tactics and false propaganda. End quote. This kind of slander made many worry that Yoon's regime would lead to a regression of democracy. To others, Yoon's rant simply sounded like the tired mantra of old school conservatives who routinely parrot the language of the dictatorship era. So this is the way that this person has been talking about their political opponents, and we've seen now that he attempted whatever we want to call his attempt today. You want to call it a coup? I mean, it wasn't particularly effective, right? Um, but this is the kind of rhetoric that this guy was engaging in, and this is how his rhetoric was met by a joint session of the U.S. Of the U.S. Congress um, when he was here on a state visit. So let me play that.
But today, in many parts of the world, false propaganda and disinformation are distorting the truth and the public opinion. They are threatening democracy. The rule of law allows the freedoms of everyone to coexist. It is upheld by parliamentary democracy. False propaganda and disinformation corrupt intellectualism. They threaten democracy and the rule of law.
Again, this is the guy who tried to overthrow the government.
This Israel supporting body loves the rule of law and democracy.
Such totalitarian forces may conceal and disguise themselves as defenders of democracy or human rights.
Interesting when people do that.
But in reality, they deny freedom and democracy. We must not be fooled by such deception and disguises.
There's Democratic Party presidential candidate Kamala Harris
She loves this.
loving it. Yeah, I mean, really, I think that is something. It's funny to catch them in the hypocrisy. I mean, that is something that is harrowing. That should
Yeah.
frighten you when you see that kind of reaction from our government against somebody who, at the time, everybody knew was an enemy of democracy, talking in this way, because it has been abundantly clear that that these politicians in the United States of America want to restrict our rights to engage in free speech activities, and the past 8 years have shown us that we should take those threats very seriously.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find the article, but there's one. It was covered in the New York Times, but there's like research out there that is like the threat to democracy is always defined as these fringes
Oh,
on the
yeah,
far
totally.
left and the far right. No, the actual threat to democracy is these people who imagine themselves as the center, which is another way of saying on top of all y'all motherfuckers. And they get to decide when we need to listen. And when it comes to like matters of political economy or like say how healthcare is provided in this country, they have achieved that position, and people hate it. That's why people hate political establishments. There's no great mystification here.